Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fun or Run. This is the review show where we take a quick look at a game and let you know whether or not it is fun or if you should run. The game in question today is not just a game, but it's an entire arcade cabinet. It's Star Wars from Arcade 1-Up. Hi everyone, this is Chad the Gaming Dad back with you as always on Fun or Run. And today, yes, we are looking at the Star Wars Arcade 1-Up Cabinet 3-game combo. This is one of the newer Arcade 1-Up machines. It was released in July of 2019, and I've actually seen online where they may even have an updated version with what they're calling a cockpit seat that they showed off at CES 2020, I believe. They showed what appears to be just your standard cabinet without a riser sitting on the floor, but then a seat is attached to it that gives you kind of a cockpit feel. Of course, it's not enclosed all the way around like the original old arcades used to be, but still pretty cool. Doesn't really say when it'll be out or if the seat would be sold separately, but my guess is that eventually it will be, so keep an eye on that. But going back to this arcade, this is one of the newer ones. Arcade 1-Up has been making a bunch of different cabinets with lots of retro games for a while now, but this one, I think, these new batches that they keep coming up with are more unique and a little bit nicer than some of the old ones. So looking at this cabinet, overall the build quality is really good. It feels like putting together a piece of IKEA furniture when you're putting it together. The pieces don't feel too flimsy or like they're made out of materials that'll just fall apart. It's pretty cool. Putting it together, here's a little time lapse of me and my kids putting this together. This thing is pretty fun to put together in its own right. It's kind of like a giant Lego project. However, there is of course the added pressure not to screw it up, because you basically have one chance. If you break something or mess up one of these screws or something, you're going to be kicking yourself. So be patient when you're putting it together. Taking a look at the side panels and the artwork, everything looks really great with high quality graphics that match the old machines. The marquee on here lights up pretty nicely. It's got speakers underneath the marquee. I know on some of the older 1-Up machines, the speaker was just mono, just one speaker, and it was down by where your hands are, near the joystick and that. On this one, they're tucked right up underneath the marquee, and there are two speakers, so I believe it is stereo sound.
Wait for me!
Really, looking at the whole thing, the selling point for this arcade for me and for a lot of other people is going to be the flight yoke. And the yoke is actually pretty close to the original, but you can feel that it's a little bit more plastic than the real one, but it's still pretty accurate, has a good amount of resistance to snap it right back into center when you let go. Here's some pictures of the 16-bit bar. This is a place near Cleveland in Lakewood. They have Kids Day on Sundays, so we took the kids up there checking out a bunch of old games, and what do you know, there I am playing the Empire Strikes Back version. So this really does feel a lot like playing the actual arcade in an arcade. The only worry I really have with this is the flight yoke, because it is plastic in that I'm just worried that it might become loose over time with wear and tear, things like that. But so far we've played it quite a lot, and there's really no sign of breakdown. I'm just hoping it holds up. You know, I watched some videos and read some things online, and nobody's really talking about these things falling apart too much, so I'm hoping that it's going to be solid and will last for a long time. I would still advise everybody to try to be careful, though, because without that flight yoke, there's really nothing you can do with this thing. So the three games that are in this cabinet, we have Star Wars, we have Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Now, just something that I found kind of weird, kind of funny, is the original Star Wars game was released in 1983, the same time that Return of the Jedi was coming out in the theaters. But then the second arcade game was Return of the Jedi, and the final arcade game was actually Empire Strikes Back in 1985. So they're all out of order how they released them, but hey, they're all here, and they're all really fun to play. So the initial Star Wars game and the Empire Strikes Back game are similar to each other because they're vector graphics flying in space, and that Return of the Jedi is more or less just the speeder scene through the Endor forest, and also the Millennium Falcon flying through the Death Star toward the end when Lando's flying it. You do get some quick different action with Chewbacca and some space battles. You know, Chewbacca's piloting the stolen AT-ST, things like that. It's pretty cool. So all three games have some pretty good options in the arcade 1-up cabinet. You can set different things like difficulty, as well as how many shields you get and how often they get replenished, things like that. But most important, there are some visual options. So these are vector games. At least Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back are vector games. And these played on a vector screen. It wasn't like a CRT. It more or less was a tube that would produce these really vibrant lines. And so it's kind of like an old Vectrex. But since we don't have that here, it has to be emulated on these pretty nice, bright screens that they put in the arcade 1-up. But you have to set how much vector glow you want. The vector glow basically recreates what an actual vector screen looks like. You have a few different options. You can either set it to none, or sparkle, bright, bold, and standard. And for me, I kind of either would just leave it on none or maybe standard, because once you get into sparkle, bright, and bold, the way they produce that is that there are tiny little dots. I'll try to zoom in here and show you kind of a comparison of all of these things. I couldn't really find any other videos out there comparing this too closely, but if you zoom in and look, you can see all the little pixels that basically are making this appear to have a glow. But to me, the sparkle one, you can see the dots way too much, and the other ones just kind of make things look a little blurry. So I'm either sticking with standard or just turning it off and leaving it as just clean lines, but it's up to you. The option is there. Now looking at Return of the Jedi, it's not a vector game. It used to have a CRT display, so the only real option visually there is whether you want scan lines or not. And a lot of times I do like scan lines, but the way they do it here, I'm not sure what the problem is, but the scan lines don't appear on the screen evenly. It almost looks like they bunch up in groups. It's sort of like bands of scan lines. And I don't really like that too much, so I usually leave that off. But again, the option is there. Nice to have options. So let's do a little bit more detail on the actual games. First game is Star Wars. Start off by fighting TIE fighters and eventually make your way to the surface of the Death Star. Sometimes you're firing against ground targets. Sometimes you have large towers that you can shoot the tops off of, but then you have to fly through them. And as the waves progress, wave 1, wave 2, 3, gets a little bit harder. There's more stuff. And then eventually you will make your way to the trench, where you're just barreling down the trench, listening to Obi-Wan, telling you to trust him. All these things until you get to the famous exhaust port, where you can fire your weapon, blow up the Death Star, and save the universe. Something cool to notice here is that on the trench, when you don't actually shoot anything, if you do what Obi-Wan says and use the Force, he says, "Trust me, Luke. Trust me. Use the Force." If you do trust him and you don't shoot anything, and you just avoid everything by flying, and then at the end, the only thing you'd shoot is the exhaust port, you get bonus points for using the Force. That's pretty cool. Something else that I really love is that when you're fighting against the TIE fighters, after, probably not wave 1, but after you get into the later waves, 2, 3, 4, keep going, then Darth Vader will appear. You'll know it's him because he's got the TIE fighter with the curved sides, not the straight up and down sides, with the curved sides. It's Darth Vader, and you'll even hear him say things. Really fun. But the best part about it is, just like in the movies, when you shoot him, he doesn't just explode. His TIE fighter doesn't just explode. It sort of just spins out into space, just like the movies. So all this is really good fun, and you basically just keep playing it to try for high scores, see how many waves you can complete. And the machine does keep high scores, even when it's turned off. But if you really want a real challenge, I'll tell you about some actual high scores out in the world from back in the old days. Okay, 1984, we have a guy that scored 300 million points in 49 hours of gameplay. We've got 2005, we had a guy that played it for 54 hours straight on a single credit. In 1985, a couple of people played as a team in turns for 5 days, scored 1 billion points on a single credit. I can't even make it through wave 3. So for those of you out there who want to get the actual real-world high score on this machine, good luck and get to work, because you got quite a ways to go. So the next game is Return of the Jedi, and like I had said earlier, you're on Endor, you're flying through the forest. This one's kind of most people's least favorite of the three, but my kids seem to really love it. It's their favorite. Just gotta get used to the way that you fly, because it's got that angle from the lower left to the upper right, and that's kind of hard to navigate, and once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. And then during those special levels, it switches it on you and you go the other direction. But I can see why people wouldn't have liked this one back in the day, because just putting a couple of quarters in here only to live for probably 30 seconds till you crashed 3 times and it was game over, you never really would get a chance to get the hang of it. So playing it here on the Arcade 1-Up, you can try it over and over again until you actually start to learn how to play it and get pretty good. And once you can make it through a couple of waves, this one's pretty enjoyable too. So that leaves us with the third one, which is my personal favorite, Empire Strikes Back. Not only is that my favorite movie, but it's my favorite arcade game on here, and it just happens to be the final one that they released. They went back to the original vector graphics style from the original Star Wars, but you're not going after the Death Star in this one, just like in the movie. You start off on the surface of Hoth, and you're shooting at the probots, the probe droids, and you're trying to wipe them out before they can send signals up to the mothership to let them know where the rebels are actually at. So you can shoot the robots, you can shoot their signals that are going up in the air. The more you shoot those signals down, the longer this part of the game lasts. You can get better scores. But once they get enough of those signals up to the ship, then they know where the rebels are at, and now you have to fight against the walkers. You've got the AT-ATs, the AT-ATs, and then the AT-STs are also there too. You're flying all around. Just note, you can shoot them in like the windows of the cockpit. It looks like the red eye. If you shoot them in the eye, it'll blow them up. But you also have some tow cables to use. It's a limited amount of tow cables. You shoot those. Something else really cool, if you happen to be flying towards one of these AT-ATs and you think you can make it through their legs under the belly, just like Luke did, you get bonus points for trick flying. It's pretty cool. So then after that, you find yourself in the Millennium Falcon escaping. You're fighting TIE fighters, and then you eventually have to go through the asteroid field, avoiding all the asteroids. You can't shoot them during this level. It's really cool because the music switches. It goes into the same theme that you're used to hearing from the actual movie when they're flying through the asteroid field. Just a really great touch. For high scores and things, you can also get each portion of the game will give you one of the letters of JEDI, J-E-D-I. You win each letter by fulfilling certain tasks in each wave. Shoot down so many probots, take out so many walkers, things like that. So you're going for Jedi mode too. It's just all really fun. This one has a little bit more variety because it's got more to it than some of the other ones, and I just really love this particular game. But that really brings me back then to the music and the sound. Like I was saying about the asteroid field, the music is so good in all 3 of these games. It really makes them more fun to play. I mean, even though it's just basically a chip-tune version or MIDI version of the original music, it's done so good that it just sounds great. Plus, they give you different music for different waves or different parts of the game, and then you actually get different music depending on whether or not you made it to the high scores board or not. And then the best thing, the most impressive thing, is that in Return of the Jedi, if you make it to the high score screen, you actually get a version of the Ichubba Nub Nub song from the Ewoks. The song that was so criminally cut from the special versions of Return of the Jedi movie releases. I call it less than special versions. They took all the cool stuff out in order to put all that CGI crap in. But anyway, not on this game. It was a crime that music was changed on the movies, but not here. Ichubba Nub Nub forever, man. So something else to kind of think of is that all 3 of these games, you can play them in many different ways, not just in the arcade, but you can play them on an emulator, on a MAME, and you can actually play them on your GameCube. If you have a copy of Rogue Squadron 3 and a GameCube, It's a great game in its own right, a lot of good flying and shooting Star Wars action, but all three of the arcades are included in the special features. You can either unlock them through gameplay, or you can go old school like me and use the cheat codes. So you put it in, you go to the arcade in special features, and there's Darth Vader hanging out in the arcade, complete with disco Star Wars music. You can play all these games there, but they are basically just emulations of it, of course, and the GameCube controller is no match for the proper flight yoke. But it's still pretty cool, though. It's just something that I thought I'd throw in here for you. So, overall, we're here to ask and answer the question, the arcade 1-up Star Wars cabinet, is it fun, or should you run? Now, for me, the amount of time that we've been playing and the amount of enjoyment that my family and I have already had with this machine, I just know it's going to continue into the future, and I feel it's well worth the price of the actual unit. Especially if you're somebody like me who grew up on Star Wars and have a love for the original movies. You know, I never really planned on getting one of these arcade 1-up machines, but call it the Star Wars fan in me or just the kid that just doesn't want to grow up. I used to love playing X-Wing, all these Star Wars things. The fact that it has the actual flight yoke on there and it feels like playing it in the arcade, yeah, I just couldn't resist this. And now that I've been playing it, some of these other cabinets, some of these other arcade 1-up cabinets are starting to look kind of interesting too. Kind of like that Golden Tee one. Now I'm just going to need more room in my house. But of all the arcade 1-up cabinets that I've seen, this one really seems like it has the best value, it's great quality, and of course, the most fun. Yes, to answer the question for fun or run, this game, absolutely, it's fun. Hey, thanks everybody for sticking with me and watching the entire video. I hope you liked it. The best way to help out the channel is to leave a like, leave a comment, and tell your friends. If you'd like to support the channel further, there are links in the description. But otherwise, always remember that you never outgrow video games. My name's Chad the Gaming Dad, and we'll see you on the next one. So long, everybody.